We're going to get started now. Just to start, I'm actually going to put a land acknowledgement in the chat and just say that we're coming here from Research Impact Canada, based at York University. And we recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York campuses are located that precede the establishment of York. And we acknowledge its presence on the traditional territories of many indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto, where I am currently situated, has been taken care of by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. And we also acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and this territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Belt Covenant, an agreement which is to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And as always, in our Research in Canada events, we like to invite people to share, who they are, where they're coming from, and if there is a land acknowledgement that you would like to bring into the space, we encourage you to do so. Next slide. So we're going to quickly do a bit of an introduction on Research Impact Canada, what we do, and then I'm actually going to hand it over to Eli and Raad, who are going to speak about the RIC Narrative CV Working Group. Next slide. So again, we're coming from Research Impact Canada, and I actually did not introduce myself. My name is Bissy. I'm Director of Strategy and Operations here, and I'm joined by my coworker, Sandy Chan, who's helping with all of the technical things with this event. So really thank you to Sandy. So Research Impact Canada is a pan-Canadian bilingual network, English and French, and we have over 40 institutions, mostly across Canada, and we also have a couple of members in the UK. Mostly made up of post-secondary institutions, universities, colleges, but we've also diversified to include community organizations, some research institutions, research hospital, and foundations. Next slide, please. Our mission is to, help people maximize the impact of research for the public good. And again, we do this across Canada as a pan-Canadian bilingual network. We're really focused on building institutional supports for knowledge mobilization, and events like this is an example of that, helping to bring timely topics and things that communities are hoping to address, mainly for university folks at this point, and help people share learnings and tips and practices. We also help researchers and partners demonstrate the impact of their research excellence through tools and training. And we operate as a community of practice with this network. Next slide. Actually, this is where I'm going to hand it over to Eli and Raad, who are our amazing facilitators for this conversation today, and they're going to walk us through the Narrative CV Working Group.
Eli, do you want to take this?
Sure. Thanks very much. And thanks, Bissy, and thanks everybody for being here today. We'll quickly sort of move into our own short presentation, but yeah, this RIC Narrative CV Working Group has been really amazing collaboration between dozens of universities organized by Research Impact Canada. It really enabled a lot of key resource sharing between us, making resources available to the public, to researchers across Canada and the world, in fact. A lot of bilingual resources as well. So we're incredibly happy with the way that this working group has been working out, and this session today is in many ways the fruit of that as well. So thank you, and Raad, I'll let you.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take over the screen share if that's okay. And we'll start talking about the narrative CVs.
We can transition to that.
Just confirming you're seeing the new share?
Yep.
Okay. Great. So this is just an extended sort of follow-on conversation that Eli and I sort of started at the end of September with our presentation to the Canadian Community of Practice on Responsible Research Assessment. So our focus today is to continue to discuss emerging issues and challenges that we feel are facing research facilitators, administrators, researchers themselves, capacity builders like ourselves surrounding the implementation of narrative CVs in Canada. So we're going to assume that you have familiarity with the formats of the Tri-Agency CV or the TCV and or the CV FRQ that will be discussed here and narrative CVs in general. So we don't have slides or detailed instructions or sort of guidelines on narrative CV formats here. If you're looking for those kinds of primers or how to draft your narrative CV, how to approach this format, we have some previously recorded webinars that we've both done in various contexts that we'll share at the end of this deck. And those links can be shared, will be shared with you as a participant afterwards as well. So this is just going to be a really brief presentation, sort of recap, and also some new thoughts and discussions that kind of Eli and I have been having amongst ourselves, as well as through the RIC Narrative CV Working Group, as to how this format is evolving and some of the challenges and opportunities it presents to us. So we're going to reserve most of the time for a Q&A session so that we can involve you in the conversation and really want to hear from you moving forward. So I'll turn it over to Eli from here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Raad. So, as I mentioned, the shift to narrative CVs in Canadian funding landscape is underway. It's happening very quickly in Quebec and steadily in the rest of Canada. So, university research offices are planning for how to meet the challenges of the narrative CV and trying to do so while bringing out the opportunities that it brings for changing how we view and do research. So today, we want to address what we see as sort of 4 interrelated points for that right now. First, balancing the support needed by folks who are writing these for the first time with the limited resources research offices have. Second, the timelines that have switched up a little bit for full rollout by the different funding agencies. Third, how we're learning hands-on, excuse me, with researchers while we're still at the outset of this shift. And fourth, we'll highlight what we see as some immediate challenges and opportunities that we can hopefully have some discussion about after the presentation. Raad, next slide, please.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So for those of you not from Quebec, really quickly, I should explain, we have a separate provincial funding agency called the Fonds de Recherche de Québec, or FRQ. The FRQ has also introduced an almost identical narrative CV requirement for grant applications as the Tri-Agency, called the CV FRQ. So the demand for narrative CV development support is challenging the typical support model of research offices, where we generally provide informed expertise based on experience in grant development and learning from previous researchers' needs. With the narrative CVs, we're learning about those needs and about how to develop compelling CVs at the same time as the applicants. So it's an incredible chance to really see and develop the range of individual opportunities that are possible for this new mechanism, along with the challenges. But there's no question it stretches institutional capacities to or sometimes beyond their limits. Over to you, Raad.
Yeah. So a little bit about kind of how, Eli and myself and our teams and our institutions, how we're seeing these supports evolve. So we're really exploring this mix of these different kinds of supports. So asynchronous, the sort of recorded info sessions and webinars, prompt questions, FAQs, online guides and tools, and then synchronous ones, things like online office hours, info sessions, and live webinars with audiences, hands-on workshops. We'll be running one here at the University of Calgary in the next few weeks or week. Breakout sessions, impact data source orientation. So again, it's kind of how these can be combined and how they evolve depending on the rollout and the timing of that rollout of these different formats and the needs, being responsive to the needs from sort of researchers and the research bodies that we serve. So I think what's really important also to think about is not only the evolving mix of these different kinds of offerings, but how they intersect and interrelate with one another, how they can feed back into one another. So an example here is the most significant contributions statement guide that we here released at the University of Calgary back in the summer. We're expanding this into a full TCV guide. This came out of conversations that we had across a number of webinars and consultations with individual researchers, really thinking about kind of what the needs were and how to build that particular section of a TCV out. And once we sort of sent that out into the world, we really wanted to also kind of use hands-on workshops and other consultations as sort of pressure testing those principles and approaches that we embedded in that tool. So that's kind of how we're informing our next iteration of that tool with the full TCV guide. And so we're never sort of settled on one or the other. I think both of these kinds of forms of support, online guides and tools, hands-on workshops, interactive formats should be, iterative with one another and mutually supportive of one another.
Raad, if I may just really quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just so everybody knows, that resource, first off, is excellent. It's truly excellent. It's available thankfully through the Knowledge Impact team at Calgary. It's publicly accessible, and Research Impact Canada actually funded a French translation of it as well. That's also publicly available. So just so everyone is aware of that.
Yeah, we're really, really grateful for that translation to be available, and we've ensured that everything that we're producing is licensed through Creative Commons licensing, so that it's sort of fully reusable and interpretable and adaptable to any institutional setting that people want. That's something that we're committed to from that sort of open scholarship perspective. I think just to mention that, the aim with all of these supports that we're building, asynchronous, synchronous, guides, webinars, is to build familiarity and exposure to this format, both for the researchers and the applicants that we're serving, but also for us in supportive roles, to really understand kind of the common challenges and the opportunities that this particular format presents. And I think we've been hearing, again, through our Narrative CV working group, but also elsewhere, that people are piloting this in really smart ways. So they're integrating the narrative CV format in internal competitions or opportunities or awards processes, and I think that that's a really great way to sort of create that sandbox with a lower stakes environment where we don't want the first time that somebody's writing a narrative CV to be the project grant for CIHR, right? That's a really high stakes environment for them to sort of go through that learning process. If they have this opportunity, prior to that in a space where fewer funds are kind of at stake, that it's maybe a better place to learn. So I think this is a great opportunity as well, as we're finding in our institution, to discuss and teach individuals about new approaches to documenting and communicating their research quality and impact. And those two axes, quality and impact, are from that DORA lens. They're really kind of how the narrative CV, or the tri-agency CV at least, is structured in terms of assessment. So I think for us here at the Knowledge to Impact team, I think that's obviously a great opportunity for us to think through different ways of embedding principles of responsible research assessment into our communications, and how the narrative CV represents that. So an open question that I would love to hear from all of you as well is kind of how this format may or may not be fitting in with integration into hiring, promotion, and performance reviews kind of within your faculties and your institutional settings. So definitely an open question, something I haven't heard too much about or seen too much about yet. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from others about that. So I'll turn that over to you, Eli.
Thanks, Raad. So all of this said, we're also rolling with sort of one firm timeline on this and one dynamic one, even within the funding landscape. Just pull it back to that. In Quebec, the FRQ is done with the CCV, and all competitions will now require the narrative CV FRQ. The tri-agencies timeline has been a little more staggered than expected. Some competitions have required the narrative TCV, but we've heard that other major ones like the CIHR project grant and the SSHRC Insight Development Grant won't use it until 2027. And about some others, we just don't know yet. So between the wholesale FRQ switch and the staggered tri-agency one, we should soon be in a position to be learning lessons about how reviewers are receiving narrative CVs. And that's been a black box for us so far. There are a lot of great resources available to help researchers write these, one being the MSc guide from Calgary, but from a lot of different Canadian universities. And lots of those, as I mentioned, are publicly available on Research Impact Canada's Narrative CV Working Group resource page. Sandy, would you mind putting a link to that resource in the chat, please? At the same time, and we'll come back to this at the end, this seems like an opportune time to come together and work on some concrete evaluation processes and guidelines for narrative CVs, since we know that presents serious challenges.
Yeah, and I might just mention that I think that this timing from the tri-agencies does impact exactly the processes, the integrations that I was talking about in that previous slide of kind of more internal processes and competitions. We see that nobody necessarily wants to be the first adopter or the earliest adopter in the sense that putting forward a requirement for a narrative CV. It's going to be a new sort of thing for most people. And so if the TCV is not necessarily fully integrated until these 2027 competitions, there may be additional kind of challenges facing individuals or opportunities that want to integrate a narrative CV prior to that, right? They're going to be the first ones kind of asking individuals to do that. And so we know that these timelines do impact others who may not want to be the first ones to demand something like this from somebody. So it gives us in a research support role a little bit more time to breathe. And I think the last time we called it the sort of impending tsunami. And so that hasn't necessarily been reduced in terms of the wave size, but certainly it's been delayed in terms of the timing of when that wave arrives. And that may help to buffer some of that and level that out a little bit more in terms of kind of the ability for us to provide those supports and design those supports ahead of time. So there's pros and cons to this in both instances. And some of this is kind of rehashed a little bit from the conversation previously that we had at the community of practice, but I just wanted to emphasize that we need to be seeing both good and not so good examples of these narrative CVs, the TCVs and the CVs FRQ. And that's been something that we've had to stay in constant sort of conversation with, especially through this last funding cycle, where there were some opportunities that used components of the narrative CVs or even full TCVs. We wanted to ensure that we were sharing where appropriate different examples of those offerings. So I think consults are a really important learning opportunity and experience for us in a support role of like engaging with researchers directly and faculty members directly who are writing these for the first time and understanding the challenges and obstacles and roadblocks that they're facing. I like to think of this from sort of my sort of qualitative social science lens of we're looking for this idea of kind of data saturation, these kinds of repeated barriers that we see regularly, so that we can develop these kinds of ready-made fixes to address common concerns. And I think that's going to help us with our capacity as we build out things like, frequently asked questions that are actually frequently asked questions and not just us coming up with ideas of what we think might be asked. And I think kind of an open-ended question for us as we, look out in the horizon and see that tsunami is kind of how to balance those individual level engagements that we need so that we can learn through those consultations with the actual real, capacity constraints of a lot of these research support roles and teams. We can't offer a one-to-one consultation for every, faculty member and researcher on our campus. But we do want to ensure as best we can that there's an equitable distribution of consultations happening so that individuals who do need that support are finding it with us and our team. So that's that mix of synchronous and asynchronous work that we're trying to find. And as Eli mentioned, until we see reviewers' ratings and reactions to narrative CVs, we really are kind of taking best guesses as to what we think, will resonate and does resonate. So just as an example that I'll share really quickly, I reviewed a TCV draft recently that was written in the third person point of view. And For me, as a reviewer of that, I felt that that made their work a little bit less personable and approachable. And certainly it stood out from the other TCVs and narrative CVs that I had reviewed. And so I made a comment just saying, you might want to consider using first person point of view. And the individual sort of came back to me and asked, is that a requirement? Is that something I have to do? And I said, absolutely not. Nowhere is it stated in any of the TCV guidance or anywhere else that this is something that is required, but it certainly is going to make your narrative CV stand out for better or for worse. And if I'm a reviewer, I may respond a certain way to that, but I don't know how other reviewers are going to respond to that. So that's certainly one of those challenges where, explicit kind of reviewer rubrics and guidance is going to be really kind of maintained as essential for us to go into this with, our best guesses at least are well-informed guesses, hopefully, as we move forward. So I'll turn it over to Eli to finish up, and then we'll turn to our conversation shortly.
Thanks, Raad. And yeah, so this sort of what Raad was just saying moves right into what a principal sort of challenge that we're seeing, sort of a pressing and multifaceted one, which is that applicants, for one, in an immediate sense, need to be able to anticipate reviewers' actual decision-making processes, not just what they're broadly encouraged to consider or not consider. And reviewers are looking for guidance too on how they should do this. So the extended rollout of the narrative CV by the tri-agency is an opportunity, it seems to us, to work together on developing value-based guidelines and rubric for evaluation. And I sort of stress the value-based because it's worth knowing a recent study from the Research on Research initiative in the UK suggests that evaluation guidelines that are just sort of procedural don't seem to work well for narrative CVs. So that's a sort of a first challenge that we see and opportunity. Second is the documentation and evidence for a lot of contributions that have not traditionally been recognized within these narrative CVs. I do want to mention that many university librarians have been doing really, really outstanding work identifying hugely helpful new resources in this respect. But there are some activities that just remain very difficult to provide documentation for. For example, evidence of community impact and benefit. So this seems like a particularly important challenge for the tri-agency TCV. Just to note here, because it has to be self-contained, right? It can't contain hyperlinks to something that might reveal a kind of evidence or documentation. And just to draw a distinction there, the CVFRQ, on the other hand, allows those links. So there are going to be different challenges in this respect between the two. And finally, as we also mentioned during a DORA session, and the journal impact factor and H-index. Given how important this issue is to assessment reform and to DORA, from whence this whole shift to narrative CV comes, and seeing we're at the very beginning of broad-scale narrative CV implementation in Canada, it really seems like a perfect opportunity for Canadian universities and funding agencies to come together and establish an explicit prohibition of their mention in the TCV and the CVFRQ. And that is a wrap for our presentation.
Really like to move into some Q&A. I know the kind of idea of this webinar was also to offer a space for folks to ask anything to you as kind of the experts that are leading this today's session, but also to anyone else in the room that may have learnings to share, tips and tools. So we can move into that portion. And actually, I already see a hand raised. Nancy, would you like to ask a question?
You're on mute.
Oh, yeah, we can't hear you.
Can you hear us, Nancy?
Can you hear me? No?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Sorry, I saw two computers in here. Thank you so much. This was great. So, one of the concerns I hear about faculty. So, I'm joining from the University of Lethbridge, and I work with faculty to help them do these applications. And a big question I hear is, did they give you a definition of impact and quality? Because they have a lot of, there is not a lot of clarity as in how this will be evaluated. And I'm wondering if you've experienced that or if you found any information on this.
Yeah, I think that this is, I think, a big part of sort of um, our emphasis on the need for more explicit sort of evaluation and assessment criteria for reviewers. That said, I think that the nice thing about having impact and quality, research quality as two axes by which these evaluations are likely to take place, or will take place, is that they align with DORA. So there are a lot of resources out there and discussions out there, and resources out there that discuss both concepts quite well. And I think if you are finding yourself aligned with most of that, for the most part, I think you can find that you're going to be defensible, right? That you can say that I'm following the rubrics and the understandings of what research impact is. And if there's a clear conceptualization of those two things in the way that you're structuring your narrative, I think those are gonna be the signposts that are gonna guide you in the right way. So I don't necessarily think, your narrative doesn't have to have clear definitions of this means this to me and that means that to me. But as we're providing supports, from our team, we use, a logic model for understanding and differentiating, outcomes, outputs, and impact. And we have sort of a lot of those things aligned to existing DORA guidance that's out there, and conversations around responsible research assessment. So I would say that's a starting place. It certainly needs more. And the tri-agency pages do have a pretty, I think, a common set of kind of expanded bullet points about what they expect in terms of both concepts, but it's certainly an area where we're trying to, as we build those research supports, we're trying to break those concepts down a little bit more for people. I don't know, Eli, if you had any further things to add there.
Yeah, just real quick, take it from another little perspective. It actually seems to be a question that speaks to the need for evaluation guidelines, period, in a basic sense as well. Like, is impact in fact being evaluated? Is a first question, and in some senses, it's for sure going to be, just because that's just a way of reading that will be compelling. But are the agencies looking for impact? Or are they looking for competencies, for expertise, for all of the above? Having these explicitly laid out seems like it's very important.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it seems like it's more like a similar to a teaching philosophy, right? Something that continues to evolve and aligns with the values and stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm also seeing in the chat there are some comments and questions, but I think this last question may have answered some of the things around impact, as being a concept being overlaid on narrative CVs. I see a comment about how impact should be conceptualized as influence rather than, or sorry, how it should be conceptualized as influence rather than impact. So I'll continue to look at the things that are coming up in the chat, but please do feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. I think next up on the list, I see Veronica, you have your hand up.
Uh, yes, thank you very much. Thanks a lot to Raad and Eli, the presenters today. So, firstly, I would say that the assumption that we're already familiar with narrative CV is not correct because I'm sure that many of us are just beginning to get acquainted with narrative CV. And in this sense, would it be possible to find some samples? Like you mentioned that there are resources, but specifically, do you have any samples, for example, of a regular style CV passage and this conversion into narrative CV, or a narrative CV sample somewhere? And in general, I'd like just to share a comment that the introduction of narrative CVs, on the one hand, it may be something good because it allows to highlight things that make sense for the researcher in the research that the external viewer may not immediately be able to see. But on the other hand, there is a lot of anguish and despair in the research community about discrimination that it potentially brings. There is a huge potential for discrimination via narrative CV due to non-native speakers of English who cannot self-praise themselves in such a skilled way as, for example, traditional Western Canadian speakers of English. And there is a cultural issue of self-bragging because a narrative CV is an exercise in self-brag. And again, this is culturally tabooed in so many cultures. So being responsible for selling yourself through CV as opposed to your own traditional publications, which should speak for themselves, is an issue. So two major questions. First, can we get some samples from somewhere specifically, like some links maybe if somebody could put in the chat room or something? And secondly, like, could anybody comment on this potential discrimination of non-native speakers of English and cultures that prohibit self-brag or look down on self-bragging exercises, which narrative CV appears to be?
Yeah, these are excellent points, and I think that they're points that Eli and I know the rest of the working group here have been discussing at pretty much every gathering. The sort of built-in assumptions and challenges within this new format, particularly exactly along the lines that you've mentioned, sort of non-native English speakers, those who are not familiar with this format, how they approach this, people who may not have the sort of may have cultural differences in terms of self-promotion and sort of yeah, sort of all of those concerns are certainly things that are embedded within this format, and we don't have ready-made solutions for that. I think it's something that we're trying to understand better as we navigate the sort of supports and consultations that we have with individuals, and start to see those examples. And I think, you know, what's really tricky here is that there is research out there that is showing that language use actually really does make a difference in terms of reviewers' perceptions. As I said, you know, having somebody write in the third person made me respond differently to that particular CV that I read. So those are things that we as research support individuals are trying to pass on to others, in terms of the guides that we create and the supportive resources that we put out there. But I do think that this is part of, again, it's not that we want to boil everything down to, well, reviewers just need good guidance. But the more that those standards are established as to what reviewers are looking for in terms of actually assessing the research quality and impact on its own merits, the fewer instances we have, I hope, of reviewers making judgment calls about language choice, readability, narrative flow, those kinds of things that feel a little bit more, you know, the intangibles of kind of the writing practice of these things. And I'll just mention, I want to give Eli plenty of time here because he has great things to say about this. But in terms of examples, so the linked MSc statement or contributions statement guide that University of Calgary put out in the summer has some example statements in there, which can form part of your narrative CV. And I would also look to Europe, where the narrative CV format has been integrated for a much longer period of time, where they do have some examples shared. The tricky part right now is that the TCV has not been implemented in many competitions at this point, and reviewers applicants are not necessarily comfortable sharing their sort of first instance of submission at this point as well. So we're in this tricky space where we're even seeing a limited a number of those tri-agency CVs as we're doing these consultations, but certainly those things are generally speaking requested to remain private, as many of those funding opportunities haven't even the results of them haven't even been announced. So they're sort of under embargo until we start to have that critical mass of opportunities. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to you, Eli.
Thank
Well,
you.
thanks for sure. And ideally, once people are writing these and experiencing success with it, these are things that people, at least some people, will feel comfortable putting up on their web pages, for example, as they do their traditional CV. But as Raad said, the examples right now, I'm not aware of any. But to speak more to your point about people being disadvantaged and maybe to amplify that even, for sure, this is a massive concern, and it's or many intersecting concerns that we all need to be working on and thinking through. There are, beyond cultures, there are fields, STEM fields are going to find people in STEM fields are not generally or necessarily professionally involved in narratives and creating narratives, evaluating narratives. Can, in some cases where clinical or technical precision is highly valued, narrative is something to be trained out of, even narrative skills. So for sure, there's a huge range of neurodiversity that will impact the creation of these narratives and the ease or difficulty that people experience. There are a lot of equity challenges built into, in a way, what is intended and I think can be an equitable mechanism, but it's going to take a lot of work to get there. Absolutely, and we're not there yet.
Yeah. And I just want to point out, thank you, Julia, for the great comment in the chat. I'm just skimming the chat, so I'm sorry if I didn't read every word in there. But I absolutely agree that we need to reframe that the narrative CV is sort of self-bragging. So I think that you've very well stated that, this is in the ideal circumstance, this is really an opportunity to state what a researcher has done and provide evidence for that. And so as you mentioned, Veronica, that that research can speak for itself in a list format. I think actually it's quite the opposite, that this is a format which allows you to speak to the research differently, and in contrast to assuming that a reviewer is going to understand how your research needs to be interpreted. So again, we're always viewing this with that kind of challenges and opportunities, and neither one is overweighted per se. So we're hoping to transform some of these challenges into opportunities. And we recognize that, yes, it's a new format as a whole, but there were instances, there are pieces of the narrative CV that have been in use for quite a long time and piloted in many different other opportunities, from NSERC and SHRC and CIHR in previous competitions. So there are individuals out there who are familiar with parts and components of this, and we hope that socialization will continue to happen amongst researchers as well, that people are gaining that kind of familiarity between themselves.
Okay. I see you also have a hand up from Sarah. Did you still want to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the presenters and also the organizers for this session. My question is specifically about the contribution statement. So where we want to talk about the impact of our research, sometimes we prefer to provide some references. Like let's say that can be, for example, publications. In a traditional form of CV, that is easy because we can provide like a list of the stuff. But here, because it's self-contained, my question is that, is there any way or advice that you can provide how we can provide such these references? Yeah, thank you.
I can jump in on that if
Yeah, please.
You can't provide a list of references. Well, I mean, you technically are allowed to include that within part of the 5 pages, but there's no appendix to it. And the idea is that significant contributions are not simply lists of publications, but qualitative descriptions for them. But to emphasize each, just to speak of publications, for example, each publication that is mentioned does need to have the full reference within both the TCV and the CVFRQ. So how to build that in is a question. It's up to a researcher to do that. For example, half a page at the bottom of the CV could be, or at the bottom of the most significant contributions could be used as a reference list for the rest. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that can be done that way. Or you can have a publication or a collection of publications, the information within each particular contribution. It's up to you, but it is important that that information be full, complete, and self-contained within the TCV self-contained.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's a little bit of an open question in that regard. I've been trying to wrap my head a little bit about around sort of self-contained and what that exactly means, other than no hyperlinks and no sort of like bibliography lists in an appendix. I would just recommend that you pay very close attention to the particular opportunity that you are applying for and how they are defining self-contained and what they might be looking for in terms of that, and reach out to the grants officers if you have any questions about sort of how to include lists of outputs and other things. I think again, this is one of those things that as we're seeing more and more examples and as we're understanding what reviewers are looking for, we'll have better answers for that. But I do think that it's kind of up to you as to how you want to build your evidentiary support for your outputs. And I think reviewers would expect to see a pretty strong list of those that are supported with that qualitative description as well. So again, it's a trick of kind of how you're going to fit that all into those kind of 5 pages. But yeah, it's not a great answer. I know.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
no, I truly understand. Thank you so much for
Mhm.
all the suggestion and advice. Just to follow up, because I'm thinking that, for example, when we write like a statement, not specifically for TCV, what I do sometimes I put like a link or stuff in there, like a footnotes. But I was thinking that if I do such a these things, because it's a self-contained,
It's not allowed. Yeah.
it is not allowed.
No.
Okay,
No.
thank you. Yeah.
No hyperlinks.
Yeah. Okay.
None.
Thank you.
For the TCV.
Yeah.
So you know, I do
Yeah.
want to
For the
emphasize that
TC.
the CVFRQ does not have a no hyperlink, and in fact explicitly permits them.
Yeah. Yeah. I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
We take the next person who has their hand up, I believe Maria.
Hello. Thank you all so much for this conversation. I'm coming from a slightly different type of professorship. I'm coming from teaching stream, and while I recognize that the narrative CV is meant or it originated in a research context, just like the traditional CV did, it's not only being used in a research for like research funding. For example, at my institution, like I just was applying for a teaching related award and they were asking for a narrative CV. So fields are trying to like put a square peg in a round hole, as like those two things are not supposed to be the same thing. So I was wondering if there has been any conversation or collaboration with like, I don't know, teaching centers, teaching folks, people who have expertise like more on the teaching side about a narrative CV that is teaching related. And if not, I wanted to bring that up as that I think that's going to be a really important like space to have.
Mhm. Can I ask you a question as a follow-up? Can I ask kind of how the narrative CV feels like a sort of square peg and in terms of the round hole that would be the sort of teaching experience versus a research one? Because just from my perspective, the structure of a narrative CV as it is in the tri-agency CV, would be flexible enough. Again, this is just from a hypothetical, imagined perspective, to accommodate the difference between somebody who has really strongly emphasized a research role versus a teaching role, in the sense that, significant contributions hopefully is broad enough in whatever application or opportunity to encompass a series of, teaching activities and teaching accomplishments, teaching sort of opportunities that have been accomplished in that period of time that could be bundled in different ways. And then that third section of kind of mentorship and supervisory activities could be partitioned out a little bit further in terms of, I don't know, closer engagements from that supervision perspective, with, individual kind of TAs or others. So is there something particular about the narrative CV format that doesn't fit with kind of a teaching role versus a research one?
Yeah, so just as an example, the particular word that I was applying to, they asked us to add in a section on course-related teaching. That's a huge part of a teaching stream faculty. But we still had the 5 pages. Also, in a teaching CV, typically you would include all kinds of professional development stuff because it's not as traditional or not as like in an official sense in many fields, at least in my field. So that would be something that is part of a typical teaching CV. As another example, it's a huge section in like my regular teaching CV. This narrative CV has none of that. I mean, I did create a personal statement that was teaching related, but that's not what the personal statement was created for, how it's described and then thing. And where mentorship, like that's about like mentoring for honors and for PhDs and like dissertations and stuff, and that's how like more so how it's framed, not so much about like actually all the different teaching related things that are not research that teaching faculty do.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
my,
Eli, did you want to respond? Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
sure. No, and I certainly appreciate your concerns as well. To come two points. The mentorship, for example, is there's a deliberate emphasis on a broadening of that understanding, that it's not just about PhD students, for example, and that kind of direct supervisory relationship with students. It's really expected to be understood very broadly. It can include colleagues as well. It really is an important piece of the narrative CV that
Mhm.
that mentorships be understood in I keep saying more broad, but in a much broader way, just as a point on that.
Mhm.
Um, but also, just for example, with teaching, I certainly understand the challenge of having long lists of professional development activities that you would normally put in and can't, and in a way that's probably mirrored with the challenge of people who have pages and pages and pages of articles, but they also can't go in a narrative CV. The
Mhm.
focus there is much more on what you in particular developed out of that, for example.
Mhm.
But just a point maybe to consider with the narrative CV, which is conceived by the funding agencies much more directed to research, but
Mhm.
teaching as well is, and especially an emphasis on teaching, for example, for periods of time that has caused slowdown in research, for example. A narrative CV is an opportunity to illustrate that, the value of the teaching experience that is your career path. So in a way, I don't necessarily think that these are two opposing things, teaching and research within the framework of this mechanism. This mechanism is in many ways allows an opportunity. And of course, a mechanism is a mechanism, right? It doesn't do it on its own, but it does allow an opportunity for explicitly valuing the teaching contributions that a researcher has made, or be a teacher. So I think
Yeah.
that this is probably not the contrast that it might seem.
Mhm.
That
I guess like I think not having like teaching related sections. I understand mentorship is there, but it's quite different than like teaching. If you're a teaching stream, you're very often, not exclusively, but very often probably teaching like not just more courses, but a lot more students, dealing with a lot more TAs and this and that. And like that is its own thing. I have tons of stuff related to to kind of mentorship that the two of you have mentioned. You're totally correct. It is a more expanded definition of mentorship, but even like in addition to that, there's just so much te different ways in which teaching um, is involved, and it just is not. I guess I would say I don't really see it in the or sections at least. There, you're right. There are parts that are relevant, but there's just parts, significant parts for teaching. Faculty
I
that
think
just aren't there
I
currently.
think you're raising an excellent point that, the narrative CV isn't necessarily in all instances going to be the one size fits all solution for every piece of an application that's going to capture a full applicant's rich, nuanced career trajectory and outputs and contributions and all of these things. What I think we can do, and I'm not offering this as official advice, but in this interim period where we don't know what reviewers are looking for, we don't know like what they're going to be responsive to, is like hijack the format. Like use it the way that you want to talk about the things that you want to talk about in it. I think that's where the format is designed to be flexible to accommodate. Again, it's a DORA commitment, and that DORA commitment is the holistic assessment of a broad range of career trajectories and outputs and contributions. And I think that you can shape the way that reviewers respond to this by using it the way you want to. So if a significant contribution for you is a really important stream of teaching that you've done, you're going to be going through the same sort of like agonizing hand wringing as a researcher who has like a million outputs and they've done a ton of work, but they have to choose like, "Oh, I just need that fifth one to fit in this little section." Whereas you have like a really important, set of teaching accomplishments that you're like, does that one go in or not? I don't know. But that can be a significant contribution. Use it as such. So I think that's where we're in this state where like people's creativity is going to show what this thing can and can't do. And we're not selling it as, again, that it can do everything. So hopefully the people who are putting together these funding opportunities are also responsive to that feedback too, of like, we need a section that shows, professional development. That's just something that, teaching individuals need, et cetera. But in the meantime, I would encourage you to be creative and use the format to what you want to talk about.
Great. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
That point, just in the chat as this conversation was happening, someone said, I agree with applying some frameworks from the scholarships of teaching and learning into it. Oh, I think Nancy, you actually have your hand up now. And then someone also said that they can kind of see that point difference between mentoring undergrads in a course setting that maybe like rather than much closer and involved engagement with graduate research assistants and so on. So different perspectives that are being shared here. We do have about 5 minutes left, so just want to make sure that we're using this time as best as we can. So I'll let Nancy ask a question and potentially we may need to wrap it up after that. Go
Thank
ahead.
you. I just wanted to build up on the question before. I'm wondering if also including, how we inform our teaching practices, because that's also part of research. That's some alignment that I've seen. Or, like I have also found that doing reflective practices, but also with colleagues. Because a lot of the times they're able to provide more insights of what the contributions that they see we do in our department among our colleagues. So these are just some ideas that we've been trying to apply at our institution. Again, like trying to address the challenge the best we can.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Great point.
Sounds right to me.
I just want to, I know that again, we just have a few minutes here, and I know not everybody in the room, I was seeing some comments just about not being familiar with this format and needing a little bit more of a primer. I think, our session today was more directed to those that are research facilitators in those supportive capacities who have some level of familiarity with this format. I would encourage anybody who is unfamiliar with this format and really starting from scratch to go to the repositories that we'll share out after this session is over via your registration. Hopefully, Rick will reach out and share our slides, which have links to our sessions, which really again go through this in a more pragmatic, systematic way as to what these formats are, how to approach them, how to draft your own narrative CV. I just want to address that just so that people don't feel left out in the room if they were looking for that kind of how-to guide. And again, as you're seeing with this conversation, that how-to is not necessarily established, right? We're taking our best guesses because this is a new format for us too. So if anything, this session hopefully gives you a glimpse into that we're discovering this alongside all of you. And if you have research supports at your particular institution, use them. Reach out to your research support officers and your research support offices and talk to your grants supporting individuals so that they can review those components with you. And also start early. So don't wait until just because the timelines have been extended with the tri-agency opportunities. Start now. Build your tri-agency CV master document now, so that you have that ready when those opportunities come out. And if there are internal opportunities that get used that with that format, that you're ready for those too. So I think that this is a early adopters conversation for sure, but certainly utilize all the supports that are available to you.
100% agreed. Well said.
And Eli and Raad, I want to just open up to you. Do you have any final things that you would like to say as we begin to close out this session? No?
That
Okay.
was one of them. I think that, yeah,
so.
I think narratives are, as I mentioned earlier, it's like we're looking at challenges and opportunities. They go hand in hand. This is a really interesting new format. It has a lot of opportunity for people to take it in really creative, interesting, amazing directions to talk about themselves as researchers. But it also creates a lot of challenges for those who are not comfortable doing that and don't have that experience and aren't native English speakers or French speakers and writers. And I think that offers us this opportunity to talk with all of you and learn from all of you as to what those challenges are, understand how we relate to our science and ourselves differently, and try to do the best we can as this transformation happens in the next year and a little bit.
Great, thank you. And I did see a question in the chat about will this recording be shared? It will be, so take a keep an eye out on your email. We're also going to post this on the Research Impact Canada resources page. We actually have a specific link for narrative CVs. And I know we're already almost at time, but I'm just gonna ask my colleague Sandy to bring up a quick slide. So again, thank you to Eli and Raad, who are actually members of Research Impact Canada. And these events and these kinds of discussions and supports are things that we do as a Research Impact Network. So, if you do decide that you may be interested in learning more about RIC, I encourage you to reach out to myself. We have a lot of member organizational benefits that come along with being a member of RIC, including access to knowledge mobilization events such as this, but on a smaller, more intimate scale. Collaborative knowledge sharing. We also have opportunity and supports for Canadian graduate students who can apply for different types of scholarships, and involvement in more national initiatives that are around maximizing research impact. And then as individual members, for you coming from an institution, you have access to tools, connections with other practitioners, invitation to member-only events, and just really helping to enhance your practice. Next slide, please, Sandy. We do actually have these conversations and kind of have rolling applications, but we do ask that you reach out to us first, learn a little bit more. We can give you more information on, what we do and how we work. And I'm actually going to throw some things in the chat. And we'll be happy to meet with you, to share more resources and to share more information. So thank you. Just wanted to have that final plug as we close out this session.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for having us, Bissy, Sandy, David, and for everybody who joined.